You know, painting can be anything. It can refer to as many things as anyone can think of. So when I find a subject and get working, I don't worry about it too much. It's the times in between a dedicated subject that I begin to get nervous about the role of painting. The title of the show is Uncalibrated. And because I've always been a kind of lyrical, expressive painter, this body of work is of the Detroit project, which is so structured and architectural and set up. I had to do a lot of calibrations to make these paintings. I was working with a level and rulers. So we thought the show could be called Calibrated, except really I'm not the calibrated type. It's an effort to be calibrated, so I thought maybe Uncalibrated would be more realistic. But I wanted to figure out something about Detroit. The subject is powerful and the paintings are not random in any way at all. And since I grew up in Detroit, and since this house was photographed probably in '89 or '90, and it's the house that I grew up in, I felt it was important for me to do something about where I grew up, where I came from, what I understood, and my own real place in the world, because frankly, although I love Ipswich, clam digging and, running polo ponies really doesn't have that much to do with my life. So I came here and I tried to figure out a way to work about Detroit, and it took many, many years. And I took a lot of photographs, and I wandered around many wild, destroyed, sometimes incredibly beautiful neighborhoods, and I found images that I began to paint from. I didn't want to make pictures of houses. I wanted to make paintings of houses that had a strong geometrical, grid-based structure. And when I found, after lots of experiments, it wasn't a formula, I don't work with formulas, but when I found this format that has to do with parallel to the picture plane and a strong abstract element, I became very comfortable and really began to wail on the subjects. Once I began actually living in Detroit and dealing with the sadness of the city being dismantled, just from neglect. The factories left, people stopped taking care of their properties. This wasn't a riot that made this city disappear in the way that it did. It was landlords, it was everybody leaving and no one taking care of their property. I mean, the little house painting has a hole in its roof. All of these messes started with holes in the roof and then water damage. And first I was hoping this was really political, and then I realized it was romantic. I was saying goodbye. I wasn't paying attention to structures that nobody would ever care about again. But once I came back to Detroit, I really found it extremely difficult to paint the houses that were destroyed and ready to be taken down. And while I was working on the body of work in this show, I did start painting a very large painting of one of the destroyed houses. It's a house I painted often on Bloom Street. But there was a framed insert that I changed the colors in. I made it, the painting's called Framed. And then I made another one called Ocean View, because I put an ocean scene sort of inside this big empty rectangle inside the ruined house. And after all the work on these geometricized images, I just decided it was time to be whimsical, and I started putting potatoes dropping from the sky and persimmons, and there were pomegranates that got painted out. I put an Indian princess in from a book that I was reading on the collection at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And I just love this image of this Indian woman and many centuries ago rushing towards her lover in the woods, and the cobras in the painting were really admiring her, which I thought was lovely. I like a little danger, but it's very nice when cobras admire a young woman rushing through the woods to her lover. And then on the one of the front of the house, just whimsy made me put in a snow owl. I have lots of books on nature. And the cobras came in, and there's a night heron in one, and I tacked paintings, actually, to my own house during an art event in Hamtramck. And they were good paintings, made with very good paint, and they didn't fade. And the house looked very festive. So I actually put the paintings I'd made in the picture of the house, and then the coral from this 1664 watercolor started leaving the actual painting and dancing around on the roof, threw a couple of cobras in, and I'm somebody who needs to have a little more fun in the studio. When I started to paint, what was important was abstract painting. And I started always involved in observing something and making a response to something that I was seeing. And I think of myself as someone who's always been an outsider in painting, because when I was in college at Wayne State, everything was about a kind of very conceptual abstraction, and I got interested in painting images. And in the incredible movement that I got to be a part of, the Cass Corridor movement, I was an outsider because I was making these images and thought to be a traitor to the cause because I wasn't working against or for modernism. When I moved to New York, friends said, "You're not going to make it here as a painter using oil paint. It's now all performance art. You better shift around." And I just kept painting. And I think those years at Cal Arts were particularly interesting because the whole line was painting was absolutely dead. Painting didn't exist. There were students who couldn't help but want to paint, and I was the secret. So at Cal Arts, it was an underground secret mission, and many, many students studied, actually, and became very serious, good painters in the world. But it was underground. When I got to be teaching at Harvard, Harvard thought painting was so new and hip that it was a new art form, practically, because they weren't aware of many art forms. It wasn't important in that institution. So now that my life is oddly settled and less chaotic, I'm in the frame of mind where I want to develop a body of work that allows for imagination and whimsical additions and isn't straightly depictive of what I'm actually seeing. And I'm looking forward to this.